we're going on to part 2 on Darwin and Lady Hope. Part 1, we found out about what Lady Hope had written about Charles Darwin being a Christian and sitting together in those last moments before he died, which the Darwins vehemently were against what she had written and said that she was a hoax. So let's go on. The only piece of evidence we're going to find is these Fegan letters. And those letters would have been thrown out in a court as being contrived. Well, let's get to that. So here, I love this picture here. You see Darwin, because you see that, or Darwin's the way of Christians with the feet. Well, take the feet off right there, take those feet off, and guess what? Darwin became a Christian. That's the funny thing. But anyway, and it's the amazing thing, isn't it? That someone that was represented so much evil as Charles Darwin in the foundation of evolution would actually want to receive Jesus and receive Jesus as his Savior. So Darwin and Lady Hope. We're going to talk about this Professor James Moore, who wrote about the Darwin legend. And he also had written Evangelicals and Science in Historical Perspective, which you can see right there. He was very prejudiced against evangelicals. So let's begin. Professor Moore's take on Lady Hope. Here is Professor Moore. At first, he denied her visit altogether. Okay, he did, and so did the Darwins, right? But later he concluded that she almost certainly did visit Darwin. He had to change that when evidence came out. And he claimed that she had exaggerated facts. Really? Was he there? There were no witnesses to her exaggeration. And that she was a self-aggrandizement. That means she was trying to be of grandeur, make herself look good. Did he really know Lady Hope? Moore's account is puzzling. She was undoubtedly there, but accused her of the conversational details. Did he know what they were talking about? What did he think she would talk about? Well, she was an evangelist and very comfortable with sharing the gospel. We know that about Lady Hope. The defamation of Lady Hope, to defame her, the assassination of her character is what they wanted to do, and what he would do. That she retreated to America where she was disgraced due to bankruptcy. A pretty half-truth of being disgraced for bankruptcy. We'll find out about that later on. He even defamed her father, accusing him of wringing out revenue for himself in India when he was a hero in India for his irrigation project. We'll find that her father was a great hero, and that he had given much to the people of India later on. His only physical evidence was a letter that was basically the reconstructed, then they reconstructed, letters of Fegan. So Fegan's letters, and they were put together by a colleague, had put together these letters so that they could have evidence. Well, did they really find these letters? Let's find out what the letters actually talked about. The Fegan letters. They were reconstructed, we know that. Said they were an incomplete document that was highly edited. There was no original copy. And they were written supposedly by James William Condell Fegan in 1852. Now this is before she wrote those articles that went in the magazines in the 1900s. So these were supposedly written in 1852 before the publication of Lady Hope and Darwin. So who was Fegan? Well, we know he was a humanitarian, he was a Christian evangelist, and he was a pastor of the Plymouth Brethren Church. That he had orphanages for boys to which Charles Darwin had even donated to. Fegan and the Darwins. Well, the Darwin family knew that Charles and Emma were friends of the Fegans. Everyone knew that they were friends, that Charles was a friend of theirs. That he was the only evangelical Christian that possibly would have known Lady Hope too, because they didn't know any other evangelist, but surely Fegan would, and Fegan was friends of they were friends of the Darwins. Charles had given Fegan, permission to use the reading room for his gospel hall. Charles had given evangelist the reading room for his gospel hall? Wow. The housekeepers, as well as many of the servants, had come to the hall, and many later on we had testimonies of coming to know Jesus. Darwin listened to the boys' choir from his room, which Fegan brought the choir in. It is recorded that he gave each one of them a sixpence. He was so excited they had come to sing for him. On February 14 through 16, Emma, Charles's wife, wrote, this is the same year that Charles Darwin died, "Hurrah for Mr. Fegan. That was the nicest prayer I ever heard." She wrote that? Really? About an evangelical Christian? Yeah. This was all about the same time of Lady Hope's encounter there. Lady Hope was Elizabeth Cotton. Lady Hope was indeed staying with Mrs. Fegan. Yes, we know. We have accounts of her stay there. And Mrs. Fegan was James Fegan, the evangelist's mother. Elizabeth's husband had recently died, and we're going to go into her life and we'll find out what time period this was. And he had recently died, and Mrs. Fegan was a friend to give her comfort and asked her to come there. So Elizabeth Cotton, went to stay with her friend, Mrs. Fegan. James Fegan, the evangelist, would have indeed known that Lady Hope was there. It was his mother. And the Darwins knew this too. They actually knew Elizabeth Cotton, Lady Hope. He would have been the only link to knowing her. So they only linked the Darwins would have known, not Charles and his wife, but the other Darwin kids would have known was Fegan. They would never have known Elizabeth Cotton, Lady Hope. Charles and Emma knew Elizabeth. This is set down firmly. They knew who Elizabeth was. Elizabeth Cotton, Lady Hope. They called her Elizabeth. Emma Darwin even visited Mrs. Fegan, recording her visit in her diary about 6 months prior to Charles' death. So Emma was friends with Mrs. Fegan. Fegan's mother, right? Charles had sent an invitation to Elizabeth Cotton, whom he knew for many years. Who was Elizabeth Cotton? Lady Hope. Charles Darwin sent an invitation to Elizabeth Cotton to come and see him? Yes, he did. Charles was certainly a friend of her father. Way back, they went way back. Charles even it's documented that Charles Darwin had worked with him on the earthworm projects, putting earthworms in the soil to make the soil more productive. That's what Arthur Cotton, her dad, did. He was an engineer, and that's what he worked with. He worked in India on irrigation projects. So he was well known, and he was knighted by the Queen. That was Elizabeth's dad. And Charles knew him. Charles Darwin knew him. And he also knew Elizabeth when she was young. He had visited those of the Cottons' houses there. He had visited, and he thought her was a charismatic, full of joy, and a quite charming young woman. That's what Charles Darwin knew about Elizabeth Cotton. She was also very active in the temperance movement against alcohol, right? And so was Charles Darwin, because his mother and his grandmother were alcoholics. So Charles Darwin was in the temperance movement? Yes, he was. And so he indeed would have known Elizabeth Cotton, Lady Hope. What did the letters say? Well, the Fegan letters said that this was a preposterous story, that Lady Hope denied that Lady Hope even visited with Darwin. Really? Preposterous? When Lady Hope Elizabeth Cotton was staying with his mother, who was friends of the Darwins? He denied that Darwin ever returned to his faith at all, in God at all. Would he really do that? I don't think so. In fact, he had donated to Fegan's evangelical ministry, right? And his church. So, would an evangelist say that this was a preposterous story? I don't think so. Evangelists have all kinds of so-called preposterous stories, don't we? Of people coming to know Jesus, even the worst of the worst coming to know. Look at the jail ministry. Would he have really denied her being there? I don't think so. She was staying at his mother's house, as I said before, and Moore himself already confirmed that she had been there. So he knew that she had been there. So the Fegan letter said that she hadn't been there. Moore already said in his book that she had. We knew. Would he have fervently denied that Darwin did not have faith in God after he donated to his ministry and the choir came to sing and he gave him a place to meet? Would he say, Darwin is not a Christian, he never knew the Lord, and he did not have faith in God? Would evangelists ever say that about anyone? You never know. You never know who can come to look. God's grace is sufficient. Should he have not thought Darwin was seeking God? Yes, of course. Every person, every pastor, every evangelist knows that men are seeking God, even the worst of them. Fegan's defamation of Lady Hope. So he said, oh, Lady Hope, she was a trial to her second husband. He said T.A. Denny was a friend of his, and T.A. Denny suffered much from her. She was running a river club to Denny's death. Later, she went bankrupt and broke his heart. He had went down to the river club and was seized with illness and lay in his bed and died, like she had abused her second husband. We need to find out about that. That is really defaming her character. Was she really doing these things? Did T.A. Denny, her husband, really suffer from her? Did she really run a river club? Was she using his money and going bankrupt, embezzling his money away from him? Don't think so. We'll find more out about that. The accusation of Fegan. Would Fegan really have attacked her character in this way? He was the pastor of a Plymouth Brethren church. As a pastor, would he have really said these things about Lady Hope? Maybe. But maybe not. The count of Lady Hope's second husband, Denny. Denny was 91 years old when he died, and he died of heart syncope. Not of neglect at all. It's recorded how he died. Denny had collaborated with his wife in a coffee house. It was a shelter for the homeless with strict rules and regulations, not a river club, a place where Christians gathered to study the Bible. Fegan implied it was a nightclub or a party house. No way would Fegan have said this, knowing. In fact, if you knew about Denny, even way before, years before he even met Elizabeth and married her, he was involved with the Salvation Army. He had spent his money, and he had been his money on meat merchant selling pork, I guess, so actually selling bacon. But he had made a lot of money, and he had donated and built a lot of these homeless shelters for who else? The Salvation Army and his friend William Booth. And that's how Lady Hope met him. So he would not be running a river house. And he was 91 years old, and she was 70, which is a lot younger. But she loved him, and he loved her. And because she went and she'd read the Bible and share the gospel at the Salvation homeless places. That's what she did. Was she abusive to her husband? It would have been very cruel for Fegan to imply that she broke her husband's heart. It was well known that he loved that Christian house, and it had housed thousands of people, and she had loved him, and that's how she met him. After this is her second husband's death, she was swindled by a professional thief who had a record of doing this. So did she swindle out her husband's money? No. When he died, way later on, a professional thief came that knew that she was a widow. We'll find out more about this, and swindled out her money, right? But she was undaunted even by this, and she kept her gospel work despite that her money was gone and stolen. Her first husband knew nothing about this. Would Fegan really bring this up? And of course it had nothing to do with her husband's death, because it was much later after he died. Fegan's denial to give her recommendation. So Fegan also wrote that she had asked him for a letter of recommendation for her ministry as she was going to America. Really? He said, I would not in any way give her a letter. He added that he has always had considerable uneasiness about her sayings and doings, implying he had much more negative things to say about her, right? Would this really have been Pastor Fegan? Would she need Fegan to even give her a reference? Fegan had little social standing compared to Lady Hope. People didn't even know Fegan, and Fegan indeed was not her pastor. She was a widow of the admiral of the English fleet. Her first husband was knighted by Queen Victoria. She was famous. His name was Hope, and that's how she got her name, Lady Hope. Her father was a famous hero too, and she was close friends with many evangelists and pastors, including friends of her were D.L. Moody, David Livingstone, and even Florence Nightingale. They were probably the references she would want to give. A reference from Fegan is very unlikely. She was already welcomed everywhere she went. Why would she need a reference, especially of an unknown pastor? Here's some pictures. She was friends with, this is Queen Elizabeth, and she was friend with William Booths of the Salvation Army. She was had been a friend when she was young of David Livingstone. She was a friend of Florence Nightingale. She'd be a friend of Billy Sunday, a great evangelist, and of course of D.L. Moody. These were friends of Lady Hope. They all knew her and loved her. That's the references I would use. Anyway, the accusations without evidence. Is it she's guilty until proven innocent yet? Considerable uneasiness about her sayings and doings. Isn't that what the enemy always says? She had a lot of sayings and doings that were not reputable. Implies she had a multitude of character flaws and a lot more things to be found out. And that's what the enemy does. What were these things? The construction of the letter was very unusual too, because it of course we know it had been reconstructed. It only gave defamation of her character without evidence. Fegan read about her in the tablet, he says. I read about her article about her in the tablet. Well, everybody's like, in the tablet? He read about her in the tablet? The writer Fegan says that this tablet was his encounter, how he knew about her. Well, what is this tablet? Well, it's a Roman Catholic journal magazine. It is known that he, as a pastor of the Plymouth Brethren, would have been very unlikely to have been reading this magazine. Would you think a evangelist, Plymouth Brethren, would be getting the magazine, the tablet, and trying to read? And would it have even been published in the tablet? I don't know. In fact, they haven't found anything in the tablet. But the tablet, so that definitely must have been contrived. And then the worst of this whole thing, when I say worst, the thing that would really prove that the Fegan letters were false, was the postscript. Finally, there was a postscript saying, why did Lady Hope not clear her name from the slur made by Francis Darwin? If she was so good, she would have went and took her to court and cleared her name, right? That's what he's saying. This was clearly a mistake to print, this postscript, because how would Fegan, this evangelist, know about a private letter written from Francis Darwin? Fegan would never have known about a letter. Why didn't, basically he's saying, why didn't he clear his name after Francis wrote that letter? Fegan knew nothing about this letter. And it would be impossible for him to have known it. Would he have access to this letter? No, he was an evangelist. He did, and the Darwins didn't know him personally. They would not have given him access to letters, personal letters written. Plus, would he have recommended her to go to court? So this is what this Plymouth Brethren pastor says, that she should have went to court. Well, it's very surprising for him to suggest this, being a Plymouth Brethren pastor, because they did not believe in taking people to court, especially Christians. They were totally against for Christians taking each other to court. He would not have recommended this. So this postscript basically proved that the Fegan letters were where the hoax lied. Fegan letters are a hoax, not Lady Hope. It is unfortunate that everything came down to some contrived letters, and everyone now believed this lie. That's what's really unreal, isn't it? Is that we'd all believe the lie and say, oh, yes, she was a hoax for some contrived letters. Moore used Fegan to defame Lady Hope. Why? Why would he want to defame her? Well, we know why the enemy wanted to defame her, because she was evidence, she had witness of Charles Darwin knowing Jesus. Here, I love this picture of Lady Hope witnessing to the royalty. Wherever she went, she told people about Jesus. So now we're going to go on to going over, I think it's important of going over the biography of Lady Hope. I also want to read at the end of all this, the article that she wrote that is so beautiful. So let's stop there.